I've just admitted a couple more there, so we'll give them a chance to make sure their audio comes on, or a few seconds. But I think looks like everyone should be there. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Hank George, president of the Salty Dog Sailing Association. We welcome you to another great webinar. Our speaker today, Russ Owen, is a Salty Dog world-class sailor. He and his wife, Laurie, completed a circumnavigation a few years ago on board their catamaran Nexus. You're going to find this an incredibly informative talk this afternoon. And I know I'm not setting a high bar, Russ, because you'll exceed even that. So everyone, pay close attention, take some notes. And we are recording this, and so you may very well want to come back and listen to the recording again. There are a whole series of folks just connecting again, Russ, so we'll just hold up just a second here before getting it going and make sure they're in with audio. Okay. And just want to welcome everyone in case you came in late. Russ Owen will be speaking today. He's a world-class salty dog, has completed a circumnavigation with his wife, Laurie, just a few years ago. And so I'm going to turn it over to Barb for a few comments before we get going. Barb, go ahead.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Barb, and we've got another great Salty Dog webinar today. So I want to thank you for joining us. I'd also like to thank Hylas Yachts for their webinar sponsorship and for their support of the Salty Dog Sailing Association. It's thanks to Hylas that we're able to keep our webinar fees low. And of course, thanks also to today's presenter, Russ Owen. As Hank said, Russ is a Salty Dog world-class sailor and a circumnavigator, so no doubt we're going to all benefit from his webinar today. And before we get started, let's remember to keep muted and video off. And I have opened the chat box. That's where you can type in any questions that you have for Russ. Russ will probably hold those questions till the end and a question and answer session after the presentation, but go ahead and type them in at any time. And we are recording this webinar, and I'll send you all out a link as soon as we have it ready. So let's go ahead and get started. Today's webinar is Seamanship Tips to Ensure a Safe Passage, Getting Crew and Boat Ready, presented by Russ Owen. So take it away, Russ.
Thank you, Barb. And good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all getting excited and ready for your big voyage in a few weeks here. And I hope this presentation comes in at a very useful time for you, because I know it's very busy getting your boats ready and your crew ready and getting all your land details sorted out and provisioning done. But it's important just to run over a few tips just to help keep you safe. And so I want to share a few of the tips that we've gathered over our voyages, and hopefully you'll find them useful. The general topics for today, I want to cover some general safety tips. I want to talk a bit about the role of a captain, cover some navigation and watch keeping ideas. I'm going to give you a basic overview of ship lights and give you some tips for sailing in commercial traffic, because you will see commercial traffic on your voyage. And then finally, some pointers on arrival into the islands when you get there. So first of all, for general safety, and that's my wife, Laurie, there in the picture, safety really comes from good planning and habitual behavior. What you find on long-term passages is that you get complacent. And if you're a new sailor, you spend a lot of time thinking about what I need to do to be safe. And you really want to practice it enough that it's a habit, because if there's a lot of confusion in a genuine emergency at sea, sometimes you don't have time to think about things. And that's when good planning ahead of time and ingrained habits come into play, where you just automatically do things out of a matter of force of habit. So try to get into those habits as you prepare for your voyage. In general safety, first and foremost, I always gave safety briefings to our crew at the beginning of every voyage and anytime we added or changed a crew member. And I think it's really important just to run over the rules as a refresher, what your expectations are as a captain. You want them to be clipped in, you want them to wear their vests, you want them to, basically listen to you and you give some commands. And perhaps you want to do a fire drill and talk to them about what to do in the event of a fire, where things are on the boat, and how they can speak with you and coordinate with you around safety issues. For fire briefings on Nexus, our standard procedure, Nexus was a 58-foot catamaran, so there was a lot of real estate to cover, and like many sailing vessels, we had a fire extinguisher in every cabin, in the galley and in the cockpit, and a couple of other places. And our standard fire drill procedure was, if somebody has a fire, they call out fire, we muster in the cockpit, and everybody who can safely grab one grabs a fire extinguisher and brings it to the cockpit. Then whoever's going to fight the fire takes the lead, and they hand the fire extinguishers to that person. So just little simple procedures that you think about ahead of time can save you a lot of time in a crisis. It's very important to have assigned roles, again, in an emergency. For things like man overboard or some kind of damage, you want individual crew members, and they may have multiple roles, assigned roles. So somebody knows that they're in charge of preparing the life raft. Somebody should be in charge of running the radio. And it may not be the captain, although it frequently falls to the captain on most boats. In my experience, the captain is the one doing damage control when there's an issue. So you want to have a trained radio operator. You want to have somebody responsible for grabbing your ditch kit and your spare water and getting that together and mustering that. And finally, have roles assigned around how you're going to do damage control should there be damage to control. It's important to go over man overboard procedures and equipment. I don't know if you've had the standard safety at sea briefing. My wife and I took it at the Naval Academy here in Annapolis several times. And the one thing that really struck me was that the Navy gives this training every year, and they make you haul somebody out of the water. They make you jump in the water with all your gear, and they show you some demonstration of some really excellent sailing techniques for recovering a man overboard. But the one thing that stuck with me is the captain said, if you ever want to try it, he said, take 2 coconuts and just throw them overboard and sail 1 mile away and try to turn around and sail back and find them. He said, you very likely won't. And he said, that's the size of a human head floating in the water. And that's how hard it is to see. So the quicker you can do a man overboard recovery, the higher chances are you can recover that person. The other thing he told us was the history of all of the Coast Guard, the number of people that they have recovered who have fallen over without their life vest in the whole history of the Coast Guard is 0. So wear your life vest and learn how to recover and learn how to run your man overboard procedures and have those assigned roles. It's very important. If you have some time down in Norfolk, go practice, or Hampton area. Just go out, sail for the day and practice picking up some cushions or something like that. It's good to be very smooth and very quick on that thing. I would suggest, as I mentioned, that you train a radio operator other than the captain. And that's really important, that people in a panic situation have just a very clear set of rules in mind. They know what is a pon-pon, what's a securite, what's a mayday call, and what are the reasons for those. I would suggest that you put a laminated card on the radio or nearby the radio, something that's a quick reference card. It's easy to just type one up and explain those rules and how to make a mayday or a security call, and have it just nearby the radio with your call sign. It just makes it all that much easier for one of your other crew members, or even to remind you to go do that. You can go over in your safety briefing the location and operation of the EPIRB, your emergency beacon, and where all the fire extinguishers are. Frequently, people don't like looking at them, so they're hidden in cupboards and behind things. And it's important to teach everybody where they are and how to use them. Most important, in my view, is to teach everyone on board, even your least experienced crew member, how to stop the boat. There could be an unthinkable circumstance where they're the only one left on board that can take action. And so it's important to teach everyone on board how to stop the boat. And in addition, teach everyone on board how to mark a man overboard on your chart plotter. I'm assuming most, if not all of you, have chart plotters, but Usually there's a very simple set of commands or icons to push to mark a man overboard, and everyone on board should know how to do that. It's just a really good safety skill. Ditch bag and emergency gear should be packed ahead of time, and it should be in very easy reach. A lot of times it's to the side of the companionway stairs or underneath the salon table on a catamaran, just somewhere where you can just grab that in a hurry, and it should have everything you need inside. There's a usual list of things you'd put in an emergency ditch bag, but I would also recommend you've got photocopies of your passports and some medicines and sunglasses and things that maybe you didn't think were on the high-level emergency list. But you don't have much time to grab that ditch bag. If you do the math on a large sailboat, and if you lose a say 2 or 4 inch through hull pipe, like the main water inlet for your engine or something like that, typically the average size monohull with a lead keel will go down in about 5 or 10 minutes. If you hit a large object and knock, say, a pie plate hole in the side of your hull, you'll go down faster than that. So you don't have a lot of time to go find your ditch bag and emergency gear. So make sure it's somewhere where you can just grab it. It'll give you peace of mind. It's important to have people know where the through hulls are and where the fire extinguishers are, as I said before. And one tip we used on Nexus to help people know where those were is we put a laminated diagram of all the through hulls and the extinguisher diagrams inside each of the heads on the head door. They're sitting there part of the day. They want to stare at something. They're staring at that door. So it helps just keep in mind where those things are and how to find them as they need to. On Nexus, we just had a hard and fast rule. Nobody's too experienced. Always wear your harness and gear and clip in all the time when you're up on deck or in the cockpit. It's a very short trip overboard, and as the saying goes, if it isn't on you, you don't have it. You should have your EPIRB and your AIS beacon and your whistle and all that, your knife, on you at all times when you're on deck. I heard a captain talk, the captain of the Raven, a racing boat that did the Fastnet race in England, and they lost their keel and flipped, and everybody went overboard. And he said that captain was wonderful. He said he gave every single crew member a inflatable harness. He gave them all an EPIRB, or PLB, I mean. He gave them all an AIS beacon. He gave them all, locators and things like this. And he said when they all went over, there were 12 crew members, only 2 of them had them in their pockets with them. Everybody else, it was in their jacket on the desk, it was in their cabin, it was somewhere else. And so the saying is, if it isn't on you, you don't have it. So pick stuff that's light and easy and works well, and just wear it as a matter of habit when you're on deck and in the cockpit. We had a rule on Nexus that nobody leaves the cockpit unless they're clipped in and someone else is at the helm with eyes on them. And this is very important, again, because you go overboard in a quick hurry. And it's just important that you don't just up alone at night, you don't just hop out of the cockpit and say, oh, I can just tie that line down, I can just adjust that luff. And you go up there and you do it by yourself. So always have somebody at the cockpit, at the helm, watching you while you go forward if you have to do that. Another tip is to check the boat and rig every day. It's easy to just be enjoying your voyage for 7 or 10 days down to the islands, and I can tell you chafe happens. And so we used to carry a small pair of birding binoculars, the real tiny ones that kind of fit in your pocket. And they're nice because they're about 12 power, which is higher than the ones that you're using as a spotting scope. And they have a short focal distance. So you can really examine your rigging, all your running and all your fixed rigging, and look for fraying lines, look for chafe, look for any issues, because a lot of times it's visible long before it fails and you just didn't see it. We, on Nexus, we ran a dry boat. This is a controversial call for some people. I understand that, it's perfectly okay to have a glass of wine at dinner or a beer or something like that. But for me, I just felt like, you know what, if there's an emergency at sea and I need to wake everybody up, or I need to get them all on deck in a hurry, I want everybody 100% ready to go, at least as 100% as they can be. So we decided to do a dry boat. I don't know some of the crew we picked up along the way very well, but I didn't know how well they handled their alcohol. And so for me, it was just safer to do a dry boat. And believe me, we made up for it when we put the hook down. We probably more than made up for it when we were in harbor. But at sea, I wanted everybody 100%. So we just decided to do that. It's a captain's choice. One of the converse thoughts about that is that it's not a good time to quit drinking either. If you're one of those functional, habitual, heavy drinkers, think hard and fast before you get on a boat. And then if that becomes evident to the captain's going to have to make a call about whether or not he stops them from drinking or takes them out of the watch schedule or decides that they're probably going to be okay, but he probably won't call them up again. We had a big catamaran, as I said. When we did sail changes, particularly with the big colorful sails, we used to muster everybody on deck. And the reason for that is we were usually sailing with 3 or 4 crew, sometimes 6, but mostly 4. If you have a man overboard again, or you have an emergency injury or something that happens while you're dealing with those big sails on the foredeck, it was always better to have everybody on board and ready to go, everybody up and ready to go. So we had 2 on the helm and 2 on the foredeck taking care of the sails. And usually they went very quickly and everybody could go back to bed and it wasn't that big a deal, but it's important to have people around when you need them. We typically reef early for crew comfort. I know every time there's 2 boats in the water, it's a race, but you want to take care of your boat and you want to take care of your crew, and you're really there for the journey and to get there. It's not comfortable to just pound all the way down to the islands. And believe me, you'll have some chop out there that you'll be pounding in. I would suggest you reef early for crew comfort. It just prevents emergencies. It prevents breakage and fatigue failure in your mast and your rigging. But more often than not, a happy boat is a fast boat. And what you'll find is if your boat is not on its ear, it's actually moving through the water better. And if it's not recovering from each wave slap, it's actually moving through the water better. So we generally reefed early for crew comfort, and it's a safer passage that way. People sometimes overlook the size of loads that you get in sailboat lines, especially with the larger boats. And I would encourage you to review and practice safe line handling. Winch operation with those power winches. I think we all know somebody who's lost a finger in one of those by not being careful. Teach them the right way to wind and unwind a line off that winch safely. And of course, you want to follow the rules of thumb that you never straddle a loaded line between your legs, and you never step in a loaded V that's going to a chock aft and then forward again. It's a good way to get catapulted off the boat if that line fails or that chock fails. And finally, teach proper and practice proper line coiling and stowing. Teach people how to put the lines away, how to coil them in figure 8s or whatever your preferred method is so they don't tangle, and keep the deck cleaned up at all times so that there's not a line laying down that you can get caught in. We learned a tough lesson on kayaks and paddleboards. Because we had a big catamaran, we had 2 kayaks and 2 paddleboards, and we tied them to the lifelines on Nexus. And we were in that 2013 1500 run that had 34 knot winds and 18-foot seas for 4 days. And our deck went underwater a few times, even though we were at a big catamaran. And what we discovered is that kayaks and paddleboards are just as buoyant below water as they are above. And they basically pulled all our stanchions out on the port side of Nexus. And so we're out there in the storm trying to relash these things back to the deck somewhere else and put our lifelines back on. So I would suggest if you have kayaks and paddleboards, first of all, I'd recommend the inflatable ones you can stow. But if you do have the hard ones, try to put them aft and tie them to something that is a hard point, not your lifelines. And finally, a lot of people know this already, but people are always inclined on a nice day to open their hatch when they're at sea. You know, people, it gets hot down below, gets a little stuffy, but we had a rule that hatches are closed at sea always. And the reason for that is that even in a calm and a nice day, you could have a little gust, and it just doesn't take much for a loose line or a sheet to just catch that hatch and rip it off the deck. And then you've got a 2-square-foot hole in your boat that you've got to find a way to cover up. So we always practice that hatches are closed always. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the captain. The role of the captain is very important on the boat. You are the master and commander, as they say. You are the law at sea. And more importantly, you set the example for everybody. So they're looking at you and you need to set the example. So wear the gear you're telling them to wear and walk the walk. Do all the safety things, do all the things that you're asking your crew to do, and be the example that they're looking at. I think it's very important. Stay rested. I think that the #1 safety issue on most boats is fatigue. And you as the captain, you will need to be rested. There will be issues where you're up all night, maybe for multiple nights. And so make sure that you stay rested and you don't just stay up and worry and monitor the crew all the time. Get your rest. If you have crew you don't trust, you need new crew. But you can't stay up all night and all day for 7 or 10 days. You just can't. The corollary to that is that the crew must not hesitate to wake you. You can't be an angry bear when somebody comes down and asks you a question or wakes you up. My mantra was always, you come in, wake me up anytime. And I must admit, I struggled with it sometime, but you got to be friendly and receptive. And yes, what is it? Let's go take care of that. And you want the crew to not hesitate to wake you, because if you know they're hesitant to wake you, you won't sleep. You'll just lightly be thinking about things and you'll be up and down all the time. But if you are really confident your crew will come down and wake you in an emergency, or if they just have an important question, you'll sleep soundly. If it gets rough, I recommend you take yourself out of the watch rotation. We had a practice on Nexus where if it got really rough, that I would take myself out of the watch rotation and I would sleep in the cockpit, basically near the helm. Nap, I should say, not really sleep. And people have questions all the time, or they need assistance, or they want to point something out to you. You're not getting much sleep, but then again, you're not the primary person driving the boat at that point. And it helps you keep rested and keep availability for your crew members. In the downtimes when you're at sea as the captain, I would encourage you to think through your approach to common emergencies. Just sit down and think about, what happens if one of the through hulls starts leaking? What happens if one of my shrouds breaks, or if a sail tears or something like this, or we have a man overboard situation? Think through your approach, what you would do. Just develop your routine common approaches that, okay, if that happens, I think this is what I would do. And then you get comfortable with that, and pretty soon it becomes a memory that you can rely on. You are the man or woman of the hour, and people expect you to have a plan ready when something goes wrong. And you need to be prepared, calm, decisive, and reassuring. And the only way you can do that is if you've thought through some of these things ahead of time. There'll be plenty you haven't thought through, but the big, most common emergencies, if you've thought them through ahead of time, you'll be coherent and you'll have a plan, and you'll be reassuring and decisive with your crew. And finally, a lot of captains don't feel like they get seasickness. I get seasickness very occasionally, but I would encourage you all to take seasickness medication proactively. If there's a storm coming or you're into rough weather, if you have a medication that works for you, just take it proactively, because you can't afford to be seasick if you can avoid it. Navigation and watch keeping. Nexus, because we had 4 crew usually, we decided to go with a 3-hour during the day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and 2 hours at night. 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. watch schedule. And the reason I did that was some people do a leisurely watch during the day, but I wanted somebody in charge at all times. And the 2 hours at night, they do two things for you. One is, I think 2 hours is as long as a human being can really pay close attention to a radar screen in a thunderstorm. I think 3 hours is just a little bit long for the average crew member. And the other thing it does for you is it gives you a different shift every other day. Because as you roll around the 24-hour clock, you get a different shift every other day. And so people can see a sunset and a sunrise. They'll get a midnight and a day shift. It also gives you a good 6 hours of downtime during the day, sometimes 8, and gets you time to catch up on your rest. Watch schedules are very personal. I know people that do 6 on, 6 off. I know people that do couples watches. I know people that do casual watch during the day and rigorous watches at night. It's really up to you, but make sure you have a watch schedule that works for you. And again, as I said before, reducing fatigue at sea is a primary safety factor. People don't make good decisions when they're really tired and beat up. So you want to take that into consideration when you set your watch schedule. I gave my watch keepers what I called the 8-minute rule. Nexus sailed at an average 10 to 12 knots. The average freighter that's cruising in from over the horizon runs about 15 knots. And if you do the math, you have a potential for a close enough for a collision situation in about 8 minutes from not seeing them over the horizon at those speeds. And so we just came up with the 8-minute rule. You can do a 10-minute rule or whatever, but one of our rules on Nexus was every 8 minutes, whoever's on watch, I expect them to pick up the binoculars and scan the horizon 360 degrees. Look at the chart plotter and scan the whole circle around the boat every 8 minutes. Keeps them awake for the first thing, but it also helps you catch boats that maybe you didn't see coming in out of the haze. The other thing I tell them is avoid what I call the head in the box syndrome. You know, people that are used to their iPhones and their iPads and things, they get onto that chart plotter and then that becomes their world. Look out the window. I mean, I've had people get all excited about a radar target that's, 20 miles away because it's a large triangle on the chart plotter, and they just lost perspective that that's 20 miles away. It's not a threat yet, and it won't be for a few minutes. But sometimes people just get ahead in the box, and I tell them part of the 8-minute rule is look out the window, look all the way around the boat every 8 minutes. And of course, there's the central rule of navigation and safety is you always navigate with multiple sources of information. Use your radar and your chart plotter, use your chart plotter in dead reckoning, use your Mark 1 Mod 0 eyeball out the window in your chart plotter, but always be navigating with multiple sources of information, as many as you have available conveniently. I'd like to review just for a minute how radar works. For many of you, this may be the first time you've actually done night shifts with radar and you're relying on your radar. It's very important to understand how radar works so you can understand the picture that you see on your screen and how to interpret that when it has abnormalities in it. Basic radar puts a pulse out, an X-band pulse out in every direction, 360 degrees, and then it listens for the return echo coming back, and it marks a distance on the chart plotter around that circle with a dot that basically represents how long it took before it heard that signal and where it was pointed. And so you're basically seeing these reflections on the radar screen that are coming back, and sometimes they're pictures and sometimes they don't make any sense. A good example is when you're pretty close to a large ship or a container ship, sometimes you'll see a circle around the boat, or you'll see multiple returns where you can see where the ship is, but you're seeing multiple returns. What that is the radar signal is reflecting around between surfaces on the ship and then coming back to you a little later, and the chart plotter doesn't know where to put that. But it is drawing it at the rough distance of the ship, and that's why you get a circle around the chart plotter. Excuse me. The other thing you'll see from time to time is interference from the Navy. One time we were sailing down the North Carolina coast, and my chart plotter just started getting wiggly lines on it and fuzzing in and out. And I was thinking, oh boy, I'm starting to have a bad electrical problem. And then all of a sudden my VHF became pin drop clear with, "This is warship Foxtrot 55 hailing the sailing vessel at approximately," and he nails my GPS coordinates to 4 digits. That's the fire control radar on a fighting vessel ranging you and finding your position before he calls you. And this guy turned out to be over the horizon. I couldn't see him. Excuse me. So you'll see anomalies on your radar screen, and you just want to be comfortable with interpreting those. I'll give you an example with weather in a few minutes. But be comfortable with your radar, read the manual, and review again how it works, and try to get a lot of experience with it before you go to sea at night if you can. I recommend that everybody keep a proper ship log, not only because that's good seamanship in general, but there's a strong safety reason for that. On Nexus, in addition to all the usual things, we would log position, heading, speed, and the nearest 3 vessels around us every shift change and every 15 minutes if the person was on shift and we were in bad weather. There's a reason for this, because it not only creates a record of where you've been, but if you have an emergency all of a sudden, someone who is not the person on watch can quickly look at that log and see the last 3 vessels that were near you, and they know who to hail. We have some good friends who they had a large Fountain Peugeot catamaran. They were sailing from New Zealand to Australia and pounding into the waves and not slowing down. They opened up a crack in their catamaran hull and started taking on water. And because they were logging, the captain, who was woken up with water in his stateroom, came up, checked the log, and knew that there was a freighter that had just passed them about 30 minutes ago, was able to hail him on the VHF, and that guy turned around and rescued them. So it's good to have a proper ship's log for a number of reasons, but there's a good safety reason for it too. Lightning storms, everybody's afraid of lightning. There's no perfect way to protect your boat. And if you protect your boat perfectly from lightning, you'll get hit all the time. So it's kind of a dice roll. Most people don't get hit by lightning at sea. I can tell you that it's most common in marinas and in shallow water areas. But in case you are in a lightning storm, stay clear of the stays and mast and metal parts, obviously. And I recommend you have backup electronics. Maybe you have iNavix on an iPad or a portable GPS and a portable radio and things like that. The microwave oven, if you have one on board, is a perfect Faraday cage. That's what keeps the microwaves inside the box, and it'll also keep lightning and electromagnetic waves outside of the box. And so if you have critical secondary backup electronics, you can put them in your microwave. You can put them in your oven too, but that doesn't work as well as the microwave, but it's still a pretty good Faraday cage to protect those. Just a minute about radar and weather. When you are in a storm, particularly at night or even in the daytime, that weather might extend from horizon to horizon, but you might see a radar image that looks like this. The radar is telling you where the greatest concentration of water is. It's not telling you the wind velocity or the storm or anything like that. It's just reflecting off the heaviest concentrations of moisture in the air. Now that typically is where the most violent winds and storm is, but frequently you'll see a radar return like this at sea when you're in a storm, and you pretty much want to watch those deep red areas. The green areas are heavy rain. The deep red areas are really heavy, probably really tall cumulonimbus clouds, and that's probably where the big winds and lightning are. So you can either navigate around them, or you have the time that you have to batten down the hatches and shorten sail when you see an image like this on your radar. You can also play with your radar filter. it's important to read the manual and know how to use your radar. These two images illustrate that point. The image on the left is in a rainstorm, and there's a marina there. The image on the right, if you can see that they've turned up the rain filter to 56%, suddenly the marina appears out of what looked like a big cloud. So understand how your radar works. Most of them work automatically very well, and you can just tell it to downplay the rain or upplay the rain. It's up to you. But it's important to know that you can filter it and adjust it. Okay, enough on that. I'd like to talk a little bit about navigation lights. This will be remedial for most people. I have a 50-ton master captain's license, and these are very elementary lessons that are on the license test, but these are for ship captains. And for those of you who are sailing among ships, you may not have been as refreshed on ship lights as you were perhaps when you first learned it. So the typical ship, and I'm talking about ships that are over 50 meters long, they have a high white light, all around light on the stern area, and a lower all around white light up towards the bow. And of course they have the standard navigation lights, the stern and the port and starboard lights. If you see a picture like this, obviously it's a little bit dangerous because this guy's heading straight for you. Of course, at night, you don't get to see the ship. So you need to just review with your crew, how do you read lights at night? One of the most important examples of this you will see in the Chesapeake Bay is that big ship that carries cars. It's basically a floating garage, multi-story car park garage, and the darn thing only has about 4 lights on it. And it's a giant piece of equipment that'll light up your radar screen like you're running into a wall. But all you'll see are those high and low white lights and the red and green nav lights. Obviously, if you can review with your crew these basic angles, the upper left picture here, that ship is coming straight at you and you need to take some evasive action. On the upper right side, that's just the stern light. That's all you'll see. And he's heading away from you or you're overtaking him, one or the other. Down below, of course, again, on the left side, you see the higher white light and the lower white light. And then you see the port nav light. And that means that guy's going right to left in front of you. And the reverse, obviously, you see the high aft light, the low white fore light, and then you see the green starboard nav light. Obviously, he's crossing from left to right. So just go over these basics with your watch keepers that may not be as experienced in these things. Navigation lights on sailboats vary. The one on the left has the standard deck level lights. Most of your boats, if not all of them, have those. And on the far right is the tricolor at the top of the mast. You can use one or the other, but you cannot use both. That's against the collision regulations at sea. So just bear in mind, pick your masthead light if you're sailing and you're offshore and you're not around other boats. If you're motoring or you're near shore, use the lower deck light so that people don't have to look up in the air to see where you are. But you can use one or the other, and those are typical configurations. One you may not see too much here, but you will see more down in the islands, is the European lighting, which is red over green on the top instead of the tricolor. And they run their deck lights at the same time. And so you'll see this, and this is a sailing vessel, just like you are. You'll see a bunch of these guys out there. Frequently, as you go off the Carolinas and down into Florida, there's a lot of shrimpers and trawlers out there. They typically have a green over white light on top of their mast, and that means they're towing gear behind them. They've got a net out, or they've got a chase boat pulling the net up. Whatever it is they're working on, they have gear hanging out the back. So you don't want to cross to their stern. You want to either give them a huge berth to the stern, or you go around in front of them. Typically, they're not moving very fast, and typically the captain is paying attention to his gear. He's not paying attention to where he is at sea. There are several other configurations you can see on the left side of this chart, and there are little sayings they teach in captain school to help you remember this. Green over white is trawling at night. So that would be the guy with the nets you see here. Red over white is fishing at night, so he may have long lines or other fishing gear out. Red over green, as we saw in the previous case, is a sailing machine. White over red, the saying is pilot ahead. That's a pilot boat, and you'll see those down around Hampton and Norfolk. The pilot boats running very quickly back and forth to the ships to put pilots on board. And then there's red over red, and the saying is captain is dead, and we hope not, but that basically means that that boat is not under command. So he's drifting and there's nobody at the helm. So you just need to know that. And you will see lobster boats and crabbers that do this every now and then. So just bear in mind, it's a brief review that might be helpful for you and your crew. You will see some of these guys offshore, a long tow, 200 meters or so. You'll see the tugboat out front, and you will notice he has two vertical white lights on the upper mast light. And then he has a yellow light on the back to indicate he's under tow. And then there are relatively normal nav lights on the barge that he's pulling or pushing. And you'll see this kind of a configuration, but you don't have to remember anything except when you see a bunch of lights on a vessel and the main tugboat has two whites, one over the other. He's towing something, so give him a pretty good berth and understand that he can't change course as quickly as you can. If you see three white lights on the top mast, it means he has a very long tow behind him. And you want to look well aft of him for whatever it is that he's towing. But these are the way tugs are lit at night, basically. Talking a little bit about sailing in commercial traffic, a lot of you are coastal sailors. Some of you are very, very salty. You are very different, obviously, than the container ship or the tanker that you're encountering. And you and the ship, it's important to know, you and the ship see each other from very different perspectives. You're on the deck of your sailboat, you're out in nature, you can hear everything, all of your senses are active, you're listening to the wind in your sails and the waves, and you can actually hear his motor a long way away. He, on the other hand, is trying to see you. He's in a noisy glass skyscraper, looking out of dirty windows across 5 acres of containers, and he's looking over lit display screens of his radar and his chart plotter. So it's a very different perspective, and you can't take for granted that he sees you, even though he's trying. His radar signature shows up on your radar like a skyscraper. It's a very solid ping. Your radar signature to him looks more like a little oil drum, despite what you want to have. Most of your metal is down below water. So what he's picking up is either your radar reflector or your mast or some of the hardware on your deck, and it's not very significant. He has a 25 watt AIS Class A transponder, so he is broadcasting and listening at great distances. If you have a Class B, yours is probably 5 watts, so you won't show up on his screen until you're about 5 miles away in some cases. So it's just important to know that they're very good. They usually detect you. They're very good at seeing you, but they may not be perfect. And you just need to be cautious when you're sailing around them. Not afraid, just cautious. The important point, as you can see from the size of this container ship and those little sailboats aft of it, never assume or assert your right of way. You need to understand the fundamental rule of the sea. The first rule in the collision regulations is both captains are legally responsible for avoiding a collision. So don't assume or assert your right of way, especially in commercial traffic. And the international signal for danger and doubt is 5 short blasts on a horn. So if you see a freighter coming at you and he sounds 5 short blasts, it means he has no idea where you're going or how to get out of your way. It means you're tacking back and forth in front of him. He can't get a hold of you, whatever, but that's the danger doubt signal. And you can also use that back to him with your horn. You should always feel comfortable hailing ships on the VHF. These captains are friendly, they're professional, and they would rather you reach out to them than not. Now that doesn't mean you call them up and chat every day, but they're very used to being hailed and they're very comfortable with it and they appreciate you touching base. That said, you know, again, with the head in the box chart plotter thing, 5 miles or less is a good distance to contact them. you don't want to be hailing somebody that's 25 miles away, because you're not even on his radar screen yet. You're not even on his collision warning system yet. He has plenty of time to react. So try 5 miles or less. If you do it longer than that, frequently it kind of annoys them, even though they're polite about it. You can shine a flashlight up in your sails when you reach them. It helps them to spot you over that busy deck I was talking about earlier. And ships monitor channel 16, and they do bridge-to-bridge communications at low power on channel 13. So always feel free to hail a ship and talk to them, and use proper radio etiquette. I'd like to give you an example. Lori and I were sailing up from St. Martin, and we encountered the Alabama, which is the freighter in the Captain Phillips movie. And he was sailing down the North Carolina coast, maybe at the South Carolina border. And I'm under sail, and we're not going very fast because the wind is light, and he's meandering. He's going left and right. And so we, alter course a little bit. We're still on a collision course. We alter course a little bit. We're still on a collision course. So we decided to call him, and I want to share that call with you. I'll act it out as an example of good radio etiquette, if you don't mind. So here we go. Motor vessel Alabama, motor vessel Alabama. This is sailing vessel Nexus, over. This is Alabama, over. Good evening, Captain. We're under sail and we appear to be on a collision course, so I thought I'd reach out and see how I can stay out of your way, over. Roger, Nexus. Where are you? Nexus is 2 degrees off your port bow, approximately 3 miles out. I'll shine a light on my sails, over. Roger, Nexus, I see you. Thank you. Hold course and I'll alter to starboard for a port-to-port pass, okay? Over. Roger, Alabama. Thank you and have a great night. Nexus standing by on 16 and 13, over. You too, Alabama standing by on 16 and 13, over. So that's just a brief example of good radio etiquette, and that is a real interaction that we had with the captain of the Alabama. It wasn't Captain Phillips, by the way. Last point, when you're arriving into the islands, you're happy and tired and excited, and chances are you didn't arrive at the exact coordinates that you had planned to sail through. So you replan your course while you're at sea into the harbor. Please, please remember to walk the course at a detailed level. Hazards on these courses, on these chart plotters, disappear at lower zoom levels. And it's important when you replan your course, just like you did when you first planned it, that you zoom in and walk that chart course inch by inch if you need to discover all the buoys and hazards that disappear at the lower levels of zoom, at the lower zoom levels. It's an important lesson to learn. We were rounding Mauritius off the coast of Africa, and the Volvo Ocean Race went by us. And one of the boats in the Volvo Ocean Race wanted to take advantage of a really exciting wind shift, and he changed course and he sailed north of us, and he hit a well-charted, well-known reef just north of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, and wrecked the boat, and the crew had to be rescued. And neither his support crew at home or the crew on the boat, in taking advantage of that quick tactical change, had remembered to walk the course at a detailed level and find those hazards. So it's very good to do that when you replan. And like I said, you'll be happy and tired and excited. So take the time to do that, if you will. Okay, with that, I'd be happy to take questions. So I have one question that says, should we always say over when finished with our statement or question on VHF calls? I would say yes, it's good etiquette. It's not required, but it's important to know that you're done talking. And sometimes if the line has a little bit of static on it or something like that, it's just a more crisp signature that you're prepared to let go of the mic button and let somebody else talk to you without being stepped on. The other part of that etiquette, by the way, is you may have noticed that it takes about a half second for your radio to start transmitting from the time that you press your transmit button. So it's also good etiquette to press that button, wait a half second before you start talking. Otherwise your initial vowel or something will, or consonant will be clipped off. But yes, it's very good etiquette to say over. Any other questions? Well, that was either too remedial or boring, or you're shy, or Matt asks if this was recorded for future viewing. He just checked in, and I believe, yes, it was, Barb.
Yes, it is. Yep. And I will get that link out to you by tomorrow morning.
Okay, Ives and Louise. Earlier, you talked about having an EPIRB and an IAS on our PDF. No, I must have confused you, Ives and Louise. Maybe I misspoke. The EPIRB goes with the boat. Oh, hello. Yes, I remember you guys. The EPIRB goes with the boat, and obviously, if you're jumping off the boat, you take that with you because it's the big transmitter to emergency locate you. What I'm talking about is on your inflatable vests. They make wonderful man overboard recovery tools, where everyone on my boat had a personal locator beacon. And what that is basically a low power EPIRB that is personal. And you get online and you link that EPIRB to your ship's, that PLB to your ship's EPIRB. And basically it lets the Coast Guard know that that personal locator beacon is a crew member on that boat. And that helps because if you've got a man overboard, you can activate your EPIRB, and they can connect the dots and say, no, that captain has a Mayday situation. They're trying to recover a crew member. But it's a personal locator beacon that goes with you. It's only good for a last resort call, if you will. Your best hope of being rescued is being rescued by your own boat nearby. But that's if your boat sailed away and they can't reach you. What it does is sends a satellite up through, sends a signal up through the satellite, and people in wherever the command center is in the Coast Guard will try to contact ships around you, or if you're within 200 miles of shore, they may send a helicopter or a search plane out after you. But that's sort of your last resort call that says, I'm in the water and I'm in trouble. The AIS beacon, though, is a little thing. They make them about the size of a cigarette pack now. And what that does is when you set that off in the water, it will broadcast a low power VHF signal, and it will set a man overboard beacon on the chart plotter of your boat or any other vessel that's within about 7 miles of you if you hold it up in the air. And it helps them locate you very quickly. So those are the two things I recommend you have on your person when you strap on your harness. Somebody talked about, I'm sorry, I got to go back. Reefing early. One of the things that Jim Skinner has asked me to talk about reefing early. What I mean by reefing early is usually, it's kind of a rule of the thumb at sea. It's usually when the wind starts picking up and you kind of think to yourself, God, I should have reefed. It's too late. I mean, typically that's when the big squall line hits you and may knock you flat. And so what I talk about reefing early is when you see a trend, either the barometer's dropping rapidly and the wind's picking up, or you can see a squall line out on the horizon, reef before you get there, because the sail loads are light, the line loads are light. You know, you just shorten sail and slow down a bit, but at least you're prepared to handle it when that heavy wind hits you. It's a lot harder to pull down a loaded sail than it is a lightly loaded sail. So that's what I meant by reefing early. Watch considerations for a two-person crew from Greg. My wife and I have sailed double-handed many times, and we typically will do what we call a casual watch during the day, and then we'll do 3-hour watches at night. But it's a personal decision for you. Usually when Lori and I are sailing, the two of us, I'll I'll basically sleep in the cockpit somewhere nearby so that she can reach me in a hurry, or I'll be just inside the salon, someplace within an easy shout, and she'll do the same with me. So we have pilot berths that we use when we're double handing. But it's really what's comfortable for you and how long you think you can pay attention versus get good rest. But for us, it seems to work with casual shifts during the day and 3-hour shifts at night. Seasickness, let's see, Jim, what seasickness meds are recommended? That's a very personal decision because people always react differently to different seasickness meds. I can't take Dramamine, it makes me incredibly sleepy. So I've taken Bonane, which has basically the same ingredient, but doesn't seem to make me sleepy. I have a no drowsy version. There's a British, I wish I could remember the name of it right now. There's a British seasickness medication that's not available in this country, but you can mail order it from Canada. If I can remember the name of it, or somebody will help me remember.
Yeah, say Russ, this is Hank. It's Stugeron, and you can get it from Canadian online pharmacies. Stugeron.
Stugeron, there you go. That works every time. I don't know why it's not allowed here. Okay, let's see. See a squall line coming at night. It really depends. What steps would you take, from David? It really depends on how severe that squall line looks. I mean, if you see it full of lightning and thunder and really, really tall clouds and things like that, I'd say get everybody up, reef down to your third reef. I have sailed into squalls with the mainsail reef to its third reef and just underpants out on the jib until we see what's there. And then you can ease them back out. But as I said before, it's hard to pull them in when they're loaded with 50 knots. Obviously, you want to make sure all your stuff is secure on deck, because you might be taking heavy wind and water over the deck. So it's really just make sure everything's closed up and lashed down. You might want to muster everybody if it's going to get really difficult, and just be prepared for what happens. But typically, I just reef beyond where I would normally do, and then I'll let the sails back out once the squall hits me. Let's see, Halacia said there is an AIS DSC device from Ocean Signal that fits inside an inflatable PFD. Yes, there's actually 3 different models that do. One looks like a cigarette pack, one looks like a pencil, a very thick pencil, and the other one is more of a flattened, it almost looks like a reading glasses case. But yeah, most of the AIS devices now can be installed inside your inflatable PFD, and you can rig them to set themselves off when the PFD inflates. I personally don't completely trust that, so I'm usually prepared to set it off by hand if I need to. Let's see. Okay, that's from Ives and Louise. Yes, I would recommend both of those pieces of equipment. If I had to choose one, I would choose the AIS, and you have an EPIRB on your boat. The reason is that, as I said before, if you think about the time lag that it would take if you set off your personal locator beacon, it goes up to the satellite, goes to the Coast Guard, they call your friends and family contacts, verify that you are indeed at sea and it might be a legitimate alarm. Then they come back out and try to raise you on the radio. They try to raise, there's time that goes by. And by far and away, your fastest way back on the boat is if your own boat comes back and gets you. So I would recommend you prioritize the AIS beacon over the PLB if you already have a properly registered EPIRB on your boat that you can set off as a backup. Oh, Hellacious recommended Sturgeon. Is that what you had said, Hank? Sturgeon?
Yeah, that's right. Stugeron.
Stugeon, thank you.
Yes, and of course the other is that is available in the U.S. is scopolamine. I think that's what Ives is referring to in the next one. He says the patch. And we've used that a good bit as well. We find, some folks have an issue where they start seeing little halo around lights and that sort of thing after a couple of days use. And so, they may pull the patch off, put it back on a little plastic, let the dosage kind of dissipate a bit, and then they may put it back on. So, it is another one that's worked well for us.
Yeah, I've heard people have interesting dreams with that sometimes too. All right, any other questions? Well, I think I'm just on time here. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope this was helpful to you. And if there's anything else I can do, feel free to email me at thesaltydogs@Russ.
Yes, Russ, excellent as always. Appreciate it. Thank you for doing this for all of us. And, thank you everyone who has tuned in. And I'll turn it over to Barb for some closing comments.
Well, thank you, Russ. That was great information. I think everyone really enjoyed that. And I will get the link out to everyone for the recording by tomorrow morning. And I guess that's it. So we will see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you. Fair winds.
All right.
Thanks,
Goodbye, everyone. Have a good evening.
You too.